Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Have you noticed that with each show of the Keiser Report, the Occupy the World movement gets stronger and stronger? So after we started it, it keeps getting stronger and stronger. And it's heading into more and more countries. It's in as many countries as this show is. Do y'all get it? When is the folks at Fox, like Hannity and those bootlickers, when are they going to recognize myself as the driving force of their demise? Probably they won't until they get hit by a truck, and I don't mean that figuratively. Okay, Stacy Herbert.
Max Keiser. Yes, the Occupy the World movement is gaining traction, and I have some images to prove it. Here's from Occupy Amsterdam. This is Max and Stacy, maxkeiser.com. This is a guy at Occupy Amsterdam. Next image from Occupy London Stock Exchange. Hey, Max, OLSX. And a crash JP Morgan buy silver guy, Jim Rogers, let the banks fail. He's quoted as saying, what they are doing in Europe is saving the day, not saving the system. Just pumping up and bailing out another bank is not the solution. We need to let the banks fail.
Yes, we need to let the banks fail. Now, the banks are going to fail. That's not in dispute because the amount of debts that they have on their balance sheet, mostly non-disclosed on off-balance sheets, special purpose entity accounts, and other ways to hide the debt, is much bigger than any money-pumping campaign can possibly prevent from collapsing. So they're going to be a collapse anyway. The only question is it going to be orderly or is it going to be chaos?
Well, I maintain that they're not letting the banks fail as an act of war. It's a financial war, and you could see that in a headline I have here, Max, the global debt clock. Now, if you notice this map, this is from The Economist, the number scrolling across the top, adding up, that's the amount of public debt. This is debt that is being transferred from the banks to the population. Notice all the nations in red? Those are the ones with the most debt, the most public debt. Notice, however, also that those are the financial services economies, America, the UK, France, these countries, Japan.
Yeah, well, it was about 40 trillion, if I got that number correctly, global debt.
Yes,
yeah.
Well, it's adding up so fast as we're sitting here talking.
Yeah, well, and that's about, of course, the total derivatives exposure is 600 trillion, so more than 10 times that number. And there's no counterparty protection to that. And that's like, for example, JP Morgan has 90 trillion in derivatives risk, and there's no counterparty safety for that at all. That company is a dead bank walking.
Well, look at the top banks in Europe who are bankrupt and are dead banks walking. They're sucking the lifeblood, the life force out of Europe with their financial war. And remember, the last time Europe had such austerity measures was World War II. So if you think we're not in a financial war, then look at this. Credit Suisse buries European banks, sees Deutsche Bank and 65 other bank failing latest stress test, 40 billion euros capital shortfall. So according to Credit Suisse, in our estimation of what could be the new EBA, which is the European Banking Authority, stress test, there would be 66 failures, with RBS, Deutsche Bank, and BNP needing the most capital at 19 billion euros, 14 billion euros, and 14 billion respectively. Among the banks with the highest capital shortfalls, SocGen and Barclays would need roughly 13 billion.
Yeah, the European banks are going to go completely belly up. This is a foregone conclusion. There's nothing that can possibly stop it.
Well, look at those banks I mentioned there, Max. RBS, Deutsche Bank, BNP, SocGen, Barclays. What do those 5 banks have in common?
Huge bailouts already? And
huge bailouts from the U.S. taxpayer, but also what do they create and spin and thrust upon taxpayers around the world?
The derivatives?
Derivatives. Those are the biggest derivative wielders in the world. There is a direct relationship between how much these too big to fail require and how much fraud they perpetrate upon the nations of the world.
So if your city is bombed by a blitzkrieg and you end up having food rationed, or your city is destroyed from a financial blitzkrieg and you end up eating food that's rationed, is there a big difference there? One, they use the stealth financial weapons of mass destruction. One, they use the traditional blitzkrieg bomb weapons of mass destruction, but you're still there eating beans out of a can for a family of 12.
And the other thing that happens in a war, of course, is the loss of sovereignty. So let's look at the solution from the outgoing ECB chairman, Jean-Claude Trichet. Trichet, EU treaty change needed to impose decisions on states. So the outgoing head of the European Central Bank has called for a change to the European Union Treaty to allow for the outside imposition of economic policy on a member state. He said it is necessary to change the treaty to prevent one member state from straying and creating problems for all the others. To do this, one needs to be able to impose decisions.
Yes, impose dictatorial authority from a top-down European-wide bureaucracy run by weapons of mass financial wielding Germans. How does this sound familiar?
So, when will the penny drop? That's the next headline from David McWilliams. He's down in Dubai, and he's sitting there in a luxury hotel lobby, and what he notices are senior executives from French banks with begging bowl, walking around, asking any Arab that walks by, any sheikh, money, money please. So he's likening Europe to the Argentina of the last time oil prices were this high. And all of those excess reserves from the Arab nations went into basically fraudulent loans to Argentina and Latin America. And now this time, all of that money went into Europe because, of course, this is where the housing bubbles were very prominent.
Well, I think the point needs to be made that the history of bank fraud and bailouts going back 20 or 30 years, including the Argentinian bailout and other sovereign debt crises, etc., with each crisis and each catastrophe, savings and loan crisis in the United States, the lesson has always been, how do we change the laws to make it easier for the banks to rip people off without getting any kind of penalty? So that was the big lesson from Argentina in the savings and loan crisis, was a couple of guys went to jail, a couple of guys lost some money who are on the inside. So they changed laws thanks to the complicity of guys like Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, who just kind of write the laws that the bankers tell them to write. And this gives them immunity. That's why this banking catastrophe has become so pernicious, is that the bankers have become this multi-headed hydra cancerous tumor that's just, as you say, sucking the lifeblood out of the global economy. So it requires almost a superhero to appear with a silver bullet or something magical because right now, nobody is standing up to the bank, not Barack Obama, God, no. But there is nobody on the world stage, if any power, who's standing up to this tumorous cancer.
Yeah, but that's because they operate the world's military. And how did the price of oil, quadruple over a 7-year period? That was because of the war against Iraq on the behalf of bankers and the other major monopoly corporations. Now, when you and I traveled to the Persian Gulf in 2005, 2006, we were surprised at the love expressed for Americans. Why were they so happy? Because of the price of oil. They directly blamed all over Qatar, all over Dubai, all over Abu Dhabi. We were told that they credit the American military machine for making them so rich because of the price of oil.
Yeah, they love Americans there. I mean, the whole mythology in the U.S. is that they hate us.
Yeah.
And we're referring to Arab extremists. But when you go to an Arab country, they're like, come on in, baby. Have a cigar, have a drink, thanks for my Maserati.
All bankers hold this myth that great financial crises are rescued by war. So whether it was the Panic of 1857, followed by the Civil War, which bailed out the banking system. World War II bailed out the world from the Great Depression. So let's look at this next war. I mean, Iraq wasn't enough. Afghanistan's not enough. Yemen's not enough. Somalia's not enough. Pakistan's not enough. Now we're in Uganda. That's apparently not enough. Revealed Fox's best man and his ties to Iran's opposition. Now, Liam Fox, the defense secretary that stepped down, was forced to step down from Great Britain. His mistress, this guy Adam Warady, it turns out has been involved in an audacious plot to topple Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So the self-styled advisor to Mr. Fox has visited Iran on several occasions and met Iranian opposition groups in Washington and London over the past few years. He is so highly regarded by Israeli intelligence service Mossad, who thought he was Mr. Fox's chief of staff, that he was able to arrange meetings at the highest levels of the Israeli government. So he's also connected to the neocons in America, who of course tried to overthrow Bill Clinton because he had a mistress.
Yeah.
Well, Monica Lewinsky wasn't going around the world trying to stoke wars with other nations.
He's a war whore. He's a war whore. And, of course, that's the song that they're singing now. Let's attack Iran. This is the song that is getting all the war whores united on the same page. The Clintons, the Obamas, the Cheneys, the Halliburtons, the Chuck Princes. You know, they're singing, let's all join together as war whores because we're not intelligent enough to get real jobs. Let me explain something to you about war. You see, there's a huge debt bubble in the world, Stacy. And there's two choices. The debt bubble is cutting into purchasing power, essentially, is what it's doing. To everyone's fiat currency, their purchasing power is being eroded because to deal with the debt bubble, all these governments are printing money, willy-nilly. And it's cutting into people's purchasing power. Well, it's driving costs higher, so it's kind of a cost-pull form of inflation instead of a demand push. But we'll get to that another time. The point being that prices are going higher for stuff like food and energy, and its purchasing power is eroding. Now, there's two ways that you can get rid of this problem, increasing purchasing power. Either you let the bonds collapse and therefore let the banks collapse, or you kill a lot of people, therefore eliminating demand for the fiat money that is causing the inflation. This is what war is great for. For example, the U.S., they killed 1 million Iraqis. That's 1 million less people that are going to have to be recipients of fiat money. U.S. bombs Iran. They kill 1 million Iranians. They kill another 50, 60,000 Americans. They don't care. As long as they get rid of the demand for fiat money, that will help the top 1% not lose any purchasing power. So the humans become the fodder. So they have to decide whether they want to let the bonds crash or to kill millions of people and tens of thousands, 100,000s of American servicemen. And what is Obama thinking right now? Let's kill more American servicemen for the sake of recovery. The guy's a murdering thug. I mean, this is impeachable beyond impeachable. This is like tyrannical.
Well, Britain is the leading edge of the financial war and the wars. They led the charge. We would not have gone into Iraq without Tony Blair. If he were not the one selling it, we would not have happened. If it weren't for Liam Fox and his mistress, then we would not be going into Iran. So, you know, that's the truth there. And the other thing is these Occupy Wall Streets will be shut down immediately if we do go to war against Iran, because you're not allowed dissent in a war.
Well, remember what stopped the anti-globalization movement of Seattle was that fakakta made-up nonsense of 9/11. Okay, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way, so stay right there.
From the days of the Manhattan Project in 1942, the University of California has been involved through its provision of scientists and their relationship to the university.
UC since day one has been in charge of researching, designing, and testing nuclear weapons, and to some extent producing weapons.
Every single nuclear weapon in today's arsenal was designed by a University of California employee.
We don't want bombs.
The University of California was selected as the contractor because the Army needed scientists to leave their university positions.
A group of protesters interrupted a University of California Board of Regents meeting to demand the school sever ties with the nation's nuclear weapons program.
Permission free. Accreditation free. Transport charges free. Arrangement free. Risk free. Stereotype free. Download free broadcast quality video for your media projects at freevideo.rt.com.
Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Savannah, Georgia, and talk with artist, media historian, and critical theorist Michael Betancourt. Michael, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Hi there. It's nice to be back.
All right, Michael, we spoke to you a few months ago about agnotologic capitalism. For those that missed that episode, briefly tell us what that is.
Well, it's the idea that we're currently living in a primarily digital capitalism. That is to say, a digital-dominated capitalism, where instead of everything being based around what we know, we're actually living in a society where capitalism functions primarily because instead of having a clear knowledge of things that are going on, it functions because we do not have this knowledge. It functions through the creation of systematic ignorance and systematic unknowns.
Okay, so when somebody like Michael Moore, for example, goes down to the Occupy Wall Street movement and he says, we're anti-capitalist, he's referring to something that really doesn't exist anymore, right?
Well, yes and no. I think by capitalists, he means a small section of the current population who primarily profit through financialization. I don't think he's necessarily opposed to capitalism per se, but I think he is probably opposed to what we think of as the contemporary misinformation-based capitalism, the agnotological capitalism.
So, Michael Betancourt, if the system of ontological capitalism relies on ignorance, and you've got an uprising around the world from people kind of flowing into this digital space, isn't that a huge risk right there?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain that?
What this potentially means, and this is potential, mind you, it's potentially a fundamental challenge to the system. Some of the Occupy Wall Street protesters are demanding a tax on transactions performed by Wall Street on trades. That would basically bring an end to high-frequency trading in an instant. These kinds of directly targeted impacts have the potential to undermine the agnotologic basis of all of this. But to a certain extent, I think we can also say that this uprising, this objection, is happening because the agnotological only works so long as it can keep its population utterly distracted into irrelevancies, into arguments over things that really don't have any impact, or over issues of lifestyle or issues of personal choice, all the while arguing for my freedom is being abridged by somebody else's freedom, so we need to do something about that. These kinds of internal contradictions we saw in the Tea Party movement last year or the year before. And now some of these same concerns are appearing with an utterly different demographic group, much larger, much more inclusive than the predominantly elderly Tea Party. So yes, this does pose a very serious challenge to the current organization of the world, to the current financial situation, and definitely to agnotological capitalism, because this movement has the potential to undermine the foundations of it. However, and this is the important however, just like the Tea Party, this kind of movement is readily subject to diversion into other issues. And much of the coverage that it's been receiving is at least partially focused on these diversions, the portrayal of how the various people are shown, the particular individuals being interviewed for other television programs. All of these issues are ways of diverting it. So you portray them as a revitalized group from 50 years ago, the hippies, who only want to spend their time being stoned and having sex. Certainly, you're going to be able to create a certain amount of misinformation about this. The difference is that this particular moment in time, the same thing that enabled the Arab Spring, is enabling the Occupy Wall Street. And it's the horizontal nature of the internet as a communications system, literally bypassing what's covered in television, what's covered in our main news. And so we have these alternatives starting to emerge that challenge this hegemonic order.
Right, so the Occupy Wall Street movement is just echoing what's been going on, building up around the world. Now we've got a complete global insurrection, which I think is really the first time in history we've had a global insurrection, coordinated certainly through digital means. But you're saying those digital means, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Twitterosphere, it fits into your model where it eliminates dissent, right? Am I correct?
Well, it works to stifle dissent through a process, and you can see this really in how the various pieces of information are being presented about these organized protests. But you can also see it in how other kinds of information are presented. Global warming, the hazards of cigarettes, take your pick, it doesn't really matter. Any of these large social issues that are controversial, you can find an element of this happening. It's the idea that instead of having a clear knowledge of what's going on, you get an alternative presented using the exact same methods by which we normally arrive at knowledge. And the result of doing this, of course, obviously, is that you can't evaluate what's being presented as factual or not factual, because you don't necessarily know how they're making the judgments, because that information is being withheld very often.
In the world of fiat money, which is in its own right propaganda, it tries to create a symbol, a symbolic reference to something that people think is money, but it's actually not money at all. It's an illusion. And now we have a new chapter in the fiat money symbolic historical record in high-frequency trading, and 70% of all the trades on the New York Stock Exchange are trading in this nonsensical, non-representational propaganda fiat idiocracy. So you contend that the road to high-frequency trading actually started over 100 years ago. So give us the 100-year sweep here.
Well, I think it's more than 100 years. But the idea that, and this is actually part of my new research that I'm working on, the idea that high-frequency trading is based upon a sampling. You disassemble something, then you take pieces of it and you put it back together in some new fashion according to some new set of rules. This is called semiosis. When we do this, we have this semiotic reproduction. The origins for this are very, very old. It's part of how language works, which is why it's called semiosis. It's part of how all of our technology works. It's part of how computers work. With high-frequency trading, what's happened is there's an escalation and a speed that we do not have with other kinds of reassembly, other kinds of reproduction. And so, with this, what we get is a complete dissolution of objects, their virtualization, and then the manipulation of those virtualizations without any reference or concern for what physical basis they might have.
Right, so money has undergone this process of semiosis, as you describe it, the digitization, the securitization, the fracturing of anything that had any reference to value, and that in itself has become the scheme of trading, and this is great if you're a bank that makes money by how much of this junk you can force through the system, but in the end it steals jobs, it destroys the economy, and it creates paupers and beggars, and in America anyway, you've got the new peasant class. So people who, again, referencing this Occupy Wall Street movement, the complaints from the 1%, the people who push the fake money around, they suggest that the folks who are complaining should get a job. But between outsourcing and automation, there are no jobs. Is the whole idea of a job in America, is that kind of finished now? Is it just going to be peasants from here on going forward?
I'm always very careful about making claims about what the future is going to hold. What I am reasonably certain about is that these ideas that, oh, you just need to go get a job, there's all these jobs, if you're not rich, it's your own fault, which I've heard many, including several would-be political candidates, say. This is just falsehood. Just straight start to finish. This is just not realistic. It's an ideology. In the 19th century, it was called the Protestant work ethic, where if you work hard, you will be successful and rich. The converse, of course, is if you're not successful and rich, this proves that you're not working hard enough and God hates you. And so this is why it was called the Protestant work ethic. And we're seeing this play out in comments like Herman Cain's, just go get a job, if you're not rich, it's your own fault. Well, that's not true. That ignores all of the structural and systematic barriers that prevent people from even being able to get these jobs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when I was working on Wall Street, the model there is outright fraud, market manipulation, insider trading, and the management on a weekly basis would lay out that week's fraud, that week's Ponzi scheme, that week's stock market scam, and the salesman had to buy into that scam for the week, and that's the business model of Wall Street. Now, at some point, some people drop out because they simply don't want to participate in a system where the business model underlying is fraud, deception, and wealth confiscation. As we're finding out with banks like Bank of New York now stole $300 billion through a front-running scam. Or Wells Fargo and Wachovia stole $400 billion through a money laundering scam. People drop out of that. They say, you know what, maybe I don't want to be, like Herman Cain suggests. Obviously, he supports larceny. He supports thievery. He supports market manipulation. He probably would support a pogrom of some sort or mass incineration of a population. Who knows? But if you don't want to be a part of the incineration of people, which is what Wall Street ultimately is about, the jobs available are just not there, are they?
No, they aren't. And it's actually worse than in some ways than what you're describing, because we've now arrived at a point where our digital technology is powerful enough, it's maturing rapidly in terms of its not just its technical capacity, but its ability to perform tasks that we would normally think of as human, as requiring a human actor, human agency to perform. And so with these development, what we see are things called expert systems and AI. And those, once you've trained one of these machines, it takes away the jobs from countless other real human beings. Because suddenly the task that would require, say, a CPA, you can get by downloading TurboTax, for example. And then all of the people who spend decades in school, learning advanced degrees, learning highly skilled trades or professions, suddenly are out of jobs. That's the next phase that's coming.
Yeah, but I have to interrupt there because Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, even using TurboTax, managed to somehow not pay some of his taxes. So he needs a special helper to help him figure out how to work TurboTax. So there is a job, there is one job at least, just for the minder of Timothy Geithner. Well, Michael Betancourt, as always, fascinating. We've run out of time, but thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you. I appreciate coming. I'm always enjoy talking to you, Max.
Okay, and that's all the time we have for the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Michael Betancourt. His Twitter address is Cinegraphic, C-I-N-E, graphic. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.